All right, welcome back, everyone. Hope you all had a good Christmas. Some big stories to go into, folks. It looks like there's some internal fighting among the top members of the Chinese Communist Party. I'll be going over some signs of this because right now it looks like there's actually a lot of internal instability in China. This could spill over to some things like, well, military threats, threats against Taiwan, and other issues like this. But Xi Jinping has now put out what are being called gang rules within the party itself, the top levels of the Chinese Communist Party. I'll be explaining what this means. Also, the Chinese Communist Party is showing additional signs of paranoia. Things like the food shortages we've been warning of for a while now. They're sweeping across cities right now in China. One city in particular, more densely populated than New York City. People crying out from their buildings about this. I'll show you some videos of this once we get into it. Also, folks, with this being said, the United States and Japan are also talking about how they may defend or at least have some kind of military operations if the Chinese Communist Party were to invade Taiwan. Things are really moving forward with this. I'll be explaining what's going on these different parts, folks. Some pretty big stuff to talk about. That said, it's good seeing you all here. Yeah, BRJ, more paranoia. Yeah, that's kind of been the modus operandi of the CCP, and a lot of what they're doing right now suggests that actually internally they're very weak. Even though out externally you see a lot of pretty terrible things going on. Yeah, Elizabeth Valenzuela, you're noting. You see a lot of pretty terrible things going on internally. All the signs are suggesting there's a lot of weakness within the party itself, and this could mean some big shifts. All right, folks, let's jump into the first story for the night. That being said, first of all, let's talk about these gang rules that really are suggesting there's some serious chaos at the top levels of the Chinese Communist Party. Oh, real quick, too. We're actually broadcasting tonight simultaneously on three channels if you include Epoch TV. Folks, we are now launching our Crossroad Highlights channel fully. So we're broadcasting there live right now. If you want, please jump over to Crossroads Highlights. This is going to be the future home of Crossroads. So if you're on the Crossroads YouTube channel, the normal one, please jump over to Crossroads Highlights. This is a monetized channel. It's one that actually is not censored, hopefully. And hopefully that'll be the future home of this show. So right now we're broadcasting simultaneously both YouTube channels. Soon we're just going to be broadcasting on Crossroads Highlights. So if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and you can head over there now too, where we have things rolling. All right, that says jump into the first story. Again, right now, Xi Jinping is really rolling out these new rules for the top levels of the Chinese Communist Party that are again functioning like gang rules that show really a lot of pretty serious signs that there's internal fighting among the top levels of the Chinese Communist Party. It says here, Xi Jinping, the head of the Chinese Communist Party, is putting new emphasis on internal party regulations. That's an actual quote, internal party regulations that help maintain the power of the CCP over China. And this new emphasis is being taken as a sign that the regime may not be as stable as it appears. While it's, tooting its horns and is making noise about how powerful it is and doing a lot of really powerful external diplomacy, making military threats, threatening Lithuania, threatening a lot of other countries, internally, it may not be doing so hot. Now, for context on this new emphasis on these gang rules. This came after the 16th plenary session of the 6th Central Committee, which is a core meeting of the Chinese Communist Party's top leadership. Political commentator Lu Tianming told the Epoch Times this. He said, Xi's statements are an attempt to sound the alarm to his political opponents. Xi Jinping, again, being the head of the Chinese Communist Party. And he said this, quote, this is Lu Tianming, these gang rules will be imposed to punish opponents. Meaning within the CCP itself, there's kind of purges taking place between these factions. Now, Lu believes this is a sign that the internal struggle among the CCP's top leadership has become more intense after this recent top-level meeting of the party, and that the regime itself is both divided and in chaos internally. It's something you don't see fully on the surface, but beneath the surface, there's a lot of shakeups taking place. This could actually mean a lot. Now, as part of this push, it wasn't just a statement from Xi Jinping himself. As part of this push, the CCP's main mouthpiece media, which is CCTV, made an announcement that all organizations, members, and cadres of the Communist Party should, quote, respect the authority of the party's internal regulations. Now, the big question is, why would the CCP's main again, mouthpiece media need to remind all members, organizations, and cadres of the Communist Party itself? In other words, people and members within the party, telling them they have to respect the authority of the party's internal regulations. Why would they say that? Again, one of the hints that something's happening behind the scenes. Now, this was on December 21st, which was the same day that a top party newspaper, which is also called for the party unity, and so the top task within it is to safeguard the CCP's centralized and unified leadership. And so why would, again, one of the other main mouthpiece medias of the CCP begin reminding top-level leadership, so to speak, that they need to respect, again, they need to safeguard the CCP's centralized, unified leadership. Again, suggesting that maybe there's not right now a safeguarding. Maybe the centralized leadership right now feels that they're not so centralized and not so unified. That's what this would suggest, of course. Lu said this. He said, this official rhetoric does not directly mention Xi core and Xi central. In other words, it doesn't mention Xi by name, like, telling party leaders to get behind Xi himself. But again, this is because it might meet too much resistance from political rivals. And he says the CCP's internal struggle has escalated to some level so that Xi can only pressure the rules over the party to establish his authority. In other words, the internal fighting is strong enough to the point where Xi cannot just keep it quiet. It appears, based on these developments, that the only way he's able to maintain harmony, quote unquote, within the party is through threats against party members. And this is, again, top level leadership. Otherwise, he wouldn't need to be making public statements like this using CCTV and other mouthpiece news outlets of the Communist Party itself. Again, pointing to the idea that something's going on, basically, behind the scenes within the top leadership of the CCP. Some kind of shakeup is taking place. Again, as Lu stated, very likely chaos and division among the top levels. All right, folks. That said, again, we're broadcasting simultaneously our new Crossroads highlights channel and the old channel now. We're going to be moving things over to the Crossroads highlights channel. So again, if you haven't jumped over, be sure to jump over. But folks, tonight's episode is brought to you by Secure. And again, over 155 million Americans were affected by data leaks in 2020. The average American had their personal data stolen about 4 times over the year. People get anxious because they can't protect their online data and their online activity. But now there's a new email and messenger app called Secure. That's Secur. That can give privacy and security for sending emails and messages. Secure's server and data center are hosted in Switzerland. That's important because Switzerland has the strictest data privacy laws in the world. Secure is also the only private and secure email and messaging app that does not rely on big tech companies like Amazon, Google, or Microsoft. Important because, again, they're part of the Cloud Act, which could mean that your data would be viewable, if not by these companies themselves, then under this program they have with the U.S. government. Secure does not ask for your phone number, it does not mine your data, and it does not upload your contacts like all our other applications of this type tend to do. Secure Messenger functions by adding people you know and then adding their secure numbers. You can also still chat with non-secure users by sending them an invite. In this way, you're protected from hackers getting onto your phone and you have full privacy while you're on the app. Now, it costs only $5 for the Messenger or $10 for the email and messenger package. You can visit secure.com today for a free 7-day trial, or you can use the promo code Joshua to get 25% off. And again, big thanks out to Secure for sponsoring tonight's episode. Now, we know, if those of you who watched Crossroads for a long time, you might remember we used to focus a lot on China news. Kind of backed off a little bit on that for a while because so much has been happening with the virus, with U.S. news, and so on. But there's some big shakeups right now happening in China. I think it's important. I want to focus a bit more on that tonight to kind of explain to you how what's been happening in China, because something big appears to be brewing behind the scenes. Now, we just discussed how the top level leadership appears to be unstable to the point where Xi Jinping, again, doesn't seem to be able to keep it quiet. Through his own normal outlets of authority, he doesn't seem to be able to keep things harmonious. And so they're having to use external rules, what they're calling gang rules. They're having to use external rules to threaten members of the CCP. And again, this is within the party itself, to threaten members of the CCP with possible punishment if they step outside of it. And to, in addition to that, meaning even that was not enough, to use CCTV and other top level party leadership news outlets, mouthpiece media of the CCP, to use these to even remind people that they have to follow the party leadership and they can't, they need to maintain the stability of the party. Meaning within the party, there's instability, there's conflicts, disharmony. We've seen this brewing for a long time now. It appears to be reaching the surface. And that said, some other signs are now suggesting the Chinese Communist Party is really paranoid, especially as the Winter Olympics come close. Let me explain. Now, the CCP right now, in addition to all we just talked about, they're mobilizing a grassroots force of citizens meant to monitor their own fellow citizens. This is being done under the banner of stability and maintenance ahead of the Beijing Winter Olympics. Now, as part of this, the head of the regime's Political and Legal Affairs Commission is promoting two terms, and these are loaded terms. I'll explain it. One is what he's calling the Maple Branch Experience, which I'll explain. And the other he's talking about is grid management, which I'll also go into. Now, some context on this, the Maple Bridge Experience, that was a program from 1960 when, again, CCP was under Mao Zedong, head of the Chinese Communist Party, former chairman of the CCP. And this is where the CCP, the Communist Party, used people in a regional struggle in Maple Bridge town of Zhejiang in east of China. Now, former CCP leader Mao Zedong promoted the movement across the country, and he used it to spread the CCP's control, not just at the top levels and the middle levels, but down to the grassroots levels of the CCP. How they, again, extended the power and control of the CCP down to the level of average citizens, mobilizing your citizen to basically work as an agent against fellow citizens. In addition to this grid management, this is part of this. So again, this top legal affairs commission, head of the Political and Legal Affairs Commission, he's talking about both of these in conjunction. Grid management is part of this. That program started in 2004 in China, and it works through, quote, this is a quote, mass control in the socialist society. Epoch Times reports this is a top-down governance system that uses ordinary citizens for surveillance and social suppression, and local governments across China are now implementing and setting aside funding for this program. Now, it's important to note when a regime needs to not only have internal purges among party leadership, when you have, again, the head of a regime, let's try to divorce this from China itself right now. You have the head of a regime, a communist party, who is not able to keep things quiet, not able to keep quiet harmony among the top level leadership. And so he creates programs to begin targeting other members, forcing them under threat of imprisonment or violence or whatever else, forcing them into submission to support his rule. At the same time, even that is not enough to maintain the stability of the party itself. They need to use the mouthpiece news outlets to tell all the party leaders, cadres, different organizations all across the country that they need to follow this guidance of the party, that they need to work on the harmony of the party, suggesting again that they're losing control within their own system. Now, take that in conjunction with what's happening on the grassroots, to the point where they even have to monitor and manage the average Chinese citizen. This is in addition to all their other social control systems, and there's a lot of them, meaning that even the existing social control systems, things like, again, the social credit system, which is like a credit score for your party loyalty, essentially, even that cannot fully control the situation in China, to the point where they need to roll out a Mao-era policy. Again, in addition to all these high-tech programs, facial recognition, all the stuff they have, when even that is not enough, they need to roll it back to a Mao-era policy that mobilizes average citizens to spy on other citizens. Again, this is not a sign of strength. This is a sign that the CCP does not trust its own people. And it's a sign also that even the extreme social control systems in place are not enough to achieve that. Not enough to achieve that level of control they need. Now, at the same time, this brings back some memories of the 2008 Beijing Olympics. These were the bloody Olympics. Shortly after that, the Communist Party of China rolled out a lot of the external media programs. You might remember Xinhua took over Times Square. They still have billboards up there. You might remember they launched China Daily. They started influence operations against U.S. media. A lot of stuff began in 2008. It seems like we're seeing the same thing kind of happening right now, but you need to take this in conjunction with the changes since then. Take this in context of the growing infighting among the CCP's leadership, which we just discussed, the growing international pressure, which we'll discuss as well. Other countries really putting a lot more pressure on the CCP, even India, even Australia, really former close ally, technically, of the CCP, really putting a lot of pressure on it. A lot of countries now are turning around on this. Economic troubles. The economy of China right now is not doing so hot, and it's projected to get much worse. Also, the exposure of the CCP's genocides, the Muslim Uyghur genocide, slave labor, becoming major issues in the West, and other issues like the persecution of Tibetans, persecution of Falun Gong practitioners, what they did with, again, ending democracy in Hong Kong. All of these now are in the public mind globally. And also the impact of all these different programs they have on the Chinese people themselves, to the point where they need to start rolling out additional social control systems because the current ones they have in place cannot maintain party control over the country. That's the situation in China currently. And it gets worse. Now, I'm sure a lot of you remember we were talking before about the projected food shortages in China. Remember these reports? We were talking about this. Those of you who've watched the show for a while might remember it. Well, folks, it seems like this is now upon us in China. Remember, recently the CCP was even telling Chinese people to hoard food. Well, there are reports in northwest China that people are struggling to find both food and basic supplies. Now, as some context as well, this may not be because of actual food shortages. Instead, this may be because the CCP's own policies are putting areas on lockdown. And on this note as well, this isn't just a small town. This is Xi'an, which is a city of 13 million people. 13 million people. Now, we're all citizens right now in that huge city are forbidden from leaving. And they were not given enough time to prepare enough food or supplies ahead of time. They were not told ahead of time this would happen. They did not prepare for it. Now, I'll show you in a bit of video of some of this, but let me explain. The CCP put the city, 13 million people on lockdown on December 23rd, not that, just a few days ago, allegedly due to the rapid spread of COVID-19. And within just a few days of the lockdown, has not been long, within just a few days of this, there are already sources and videos showing people struggling to get food and supplies. The Epoch Times actually obtained a video showing residents shouting from their buildings for help. Let me show you this video from that city right now. That is video from Xi'an in China, a city of 13 million people, where again, they're saying that we did some phone calls there. People are saying basically they don't have food, they don't have supplies. The CCP locked down the city without telling them ahead of time. And again, they can't leave the city. Previous reports, and remember that this appears to be part of a a Communist Party program basically against this one area, we could see this spread. And also, this could be part of the bigger picture of possible food shortages, not just through policy, but just in general in China. Remember previous reports, the CCP banned extreme eating videos where people get a lot of food and they eat a bunch of food. That was alongside a campaign the CCP launched against wasting food, where they're telling people to stop wasting food. There was an alleged leaked document that went viral in China, which led to runs on food stores, and people were buying up tons of food like rice and so on, noodles and so on, because people obtained a document that they was allegedly meant to go to members of the Communist Party itself. It got leaked to the public and it caused panic. Remember that. There were also calls after that, much later, more recently, telling the Chinese people to start keeping food supplies and other supplies, again, raising concerns that there would be a food shortage. And now, to put this in perspective as well, this is the video we just showed you. That's a city of 13 million people. The population of New York City is 8.8 million. This is a city bigger than New York, more populated than New York, where this is happening. Now, folks, that being said, talking about all these different issues within the country and what's happening with China within the leadership at the grassroots level, even the economic system is not looking so hot, a lot of these different parts. At the same time as this, the US and Japan are now preparing options on defending Taiwan, possibly. At the very least, responding militarily to some degree to react to a possible CCP invasion of Taiwan. Now, as the CCP is facing turmoil in its leadership, growing social problems, economic woes, and growing international pressure, like we just discussed, it's also making threats of military action. And now the United States and Japan are drawing up plans on how they may respond if there's a so-called Taiwan emergency over China. Now, according to The Guardian, Japanese media are reporting that under the plan, U.S. Marines would set up temporary bases on the Nansei Islands near Taiwan. Those are Japanese-controlled islands near Taiwan, while Japanese armed forces would provide logistical support in ammunition and fuel supplies. Now, this is not directly stating that the U.S. would try to actually defend Taiwan. We can expect, though, that if Japan is going to supply ammunition, that this means logistical support for, again, resupplying ammunition, which means there may be a shooting war if that happens, or it might be just in case the CCP tries pushing further, that they are planned to defend it further. It's not clear if this is a commitment in any way to defend Taiwan, because currently the protocol basically has been helping Taiwan defend itself. But we'll see, because Japan has been signaling that it may actually step in to defend Taiwan if the CCP were to attack Taiwan, although they flip-flopped on these statements. Remember as well that the United States, Australia, India, and Japan are part of the Quad Alliance. Not a fully fleshed out alliance, but some degree at least of a defensive alliance focused heavily on China. Now, the news reports coming out about the US and Japan making these plans to defend or react to a Chinese Communist Party action if the CCP were to do something like this. This is not fully confirmed. Kyodo News is citing the claims to unnamed Japanese government sources. It appears people who've tried getting confirmation aren't able to get it, which may suggest something, because usually if you do try to call and it's not true, they'll at least deny it. But we'll see. Meanwhile, just to paint this picture a bit broader, as tensions are growing right now between Russia and Ukraine, because this appears to be a broader issue right now, what's happening. Tensions are growing between Russia and Ukraine, and the Russian government, previously, you might remember, published a list of demands that it made to the United Nations and NATO, and national security officials are now pressuring the Biden administration to reject one of the proposals to restrict the further expansion of NATO, referring to talk about Ukraine joining NATO. Let me explain. The proposal from Russia, the one that they gave, because remember, Russian troops were lining up along the border. They've allegedly gone home, but we'll see what happens. The proposal from Russia is calling on the United States to prevent NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, from expanding eastward. And that's to deny membership of the alliance from any country under the former Soviet USSR, meaning that there's talk right now about Ukraine possibly joining NATO and Ukraine again being under this defensive alliance. Russia's drawing a line in the sand. They're saying if you do that, all bets are off, essentially. And the Biden administration is basically Biden's getting pressure right now to not go along with the Russian terms on this. At the same time, Russia also wants the United States to commit to not build military bases in former Soviet states that aren't NATO members. It's under these conditions that Russia is offering to not deploy troops and weapons in regions that could be seen as security threats to NATO. And so those are the terms from Russia right now in order to basically demilitarize and roll things back. And while this is happening, the U.S. Navy, in addition to all of this, just seized a weapons cache from an Iranian ship that was heading towards Yemen, where the Iranian regime has been supporting Houthi rebels fighting against the local government again in Yemen, which is supported by Saudi Arabia. And the Saudis and Iranians have not been getting along so well, so to put it lightly. The U.S. State Department announced this after finding this weapons cache. They said the illegal flow of weapons to Yemen is enabling the brutal Houthi offensive against Marib, increasing the suffering of civilians. Now, just putting this all in perspective, folks. This is all the usual suspects, right? This is all the usual suspects. China, Iran, Russia, also North Korea, which is becoming increasingly hostile. I'm not going over stories on North Korea tonight, but North Korea has been kind of upping its game as well. Remember the context of this. There were top advisors to the Chinese Communist Party talking about the need as part of the CCP's defensive strategies to keep the U.S. engaged in 4 different wars. This does not necessarily mean a hot war, like a shooting war. This could mean like an unconventional war. It could mean a diplomatic war. It can mean proxy wars. One of those wars, it says, would be a terror war of some kind to keep the U.S. focused on some kind of terror threat. This was, again, announced, it was public speech, interestingly, by one of the top advisors to Xi Jinping. And again, here we have 4 of the main suspects, each of which is becoming more aggressive militarily. The Chinese Communist Party, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. And we can see as well whether Iran continues supporting terror organizations and whether, again, these are built up even further. Remember also, folks, with increasing instability for these countries, war could really be seen as kind of a pressure valve. This is not saying it's heading in that direction. It's a bit of a trip mine right now. The situation, I'd say, is pretty sensitive. War for the Chinese Communist Party right now could be seen as a pressure valve, where again I just went over these different forms of instability within the country. Instability deeply at the top levels of the CCP, within the party itself, amongst all the cadres, and the CCP is very large, right? Tens of millions of members. Instability at that level, instability economically, instability when it comes to basic food supplies and other things for the Chinese people, instability at the social level, instability internationally. Would a war at that point be beneficial or harmful to them? Right? Be beneficial, actually, because they can roll out wartime policies. They can roll out a lot of things that could, say, take the unwanted people of the society and make them soldiers on the front lines who they no longer have to worry about dealing with, essentially. It would serve a lot of interest. They could also ramp up propaganda and so on. The CCP, meanwhile, is aware that it does not have the ability to fight a lone war against the U.S. And so its stated goals, publicly stated goals previously, were to engage the U.S., at least not maybe if not in full war, but at the very least to some degree, to get the U.S. engaged in 4 different wars, essentially. Here we see the brewing now of something that could reflect that direction. At the same time, this is happening while a lot of countries are really weakened, both socially and economically. You can look at Europe right now, for example. A lot of the European Union countries are not doing so hot. Australia is not doing so hot. Again, economically, because of the U.S. isn't doing so hot. Economically, because of the lockdowns. Internally, because of disagreements politically and social stability being kind of turned upside down because of these COVID policies, in addition to social policies that are already pre-existing. In other words, the entire world political and economic system is destabilized, meaning that a lot of countries that would have the ability to fight right now are also somewhat handicapped in that ability to fight, meaning that centralized authoritarian regimes that can mobilize anything they want without needing to have, harmony, so to speak, in order to do it. Although the conflicts within the CCP do suggest that even that's not working out for them. They may see this as a window of opportunity. At the same time, though, just giving up possibilities, because who knows what's really going on with this. It could also just be posturing. It could be that they're trying to put, basically make noise right now at a time when threats can be useful for making negotiations, because they know that a lot of the world is pretty deeply destabilized. They know that a lot of countries are really weakened right now. You have Russia right now even kind of messing with the valves of energy into Europe, although there's mixed reports on that it might be bad policies, these green policies in Germany, partly responsible for that. But these countries know that they have influence. The CCP knows it controls American medicine, basically. The CCP knows that it controls a lot of the core goods here in the US. It knows that breaking these systems rapidly would actually cause a lot of harm right now. And it knows that the ability to put pressure militarily, put things forward, including using all these different proxies to put things forward militarily and make threats, a lot of countries are very likely going to back down. And so they could be using this to posture in order to bring countries to the negotiating table and get what they want. That's also a possibility. Not saying, again, this is going to lead to a hot war of any kind, but you do see these different issues brewing right now. All right, folks, that said, let's jump into some questions. So if you have questions, please leave them in the chat now. We'll try to get to them. Again, we're broadcasting on 2 channels tonight. We're broadcasting both on Crossroads, the normal channel, and on our new channel, which is Crossroads Highlights, and on Epoch TV. So thank you all for being on Epoch TV. We're going to try to migrate the old YouTube channel over to Crossroads Highlights. And so for now, we're going to be broadcasting simultaneously live on both channels. Soon, we're just going to be broadcasting on Crossroads Highlights. So again, if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell at Crossroads Highlights. That said, folks, as well, we do have Epoch TV. We have a lot of exclusive content there as well. We had a great interview just recently with Trump's, the former top economic advisor of the Trump administration, talking about how Trump really kind of slowly came to this realization, as other members of his cabinet did, that they were up against really a socialist decline that was taking place in the United States. And he explains how Trump actually tried to stop this, quote unquote, drift, as he describes it, into socialism. I'll show you a trailer now, that interview. It's going to be exclusively on Epoch TV. And so, folks, I'll show you that now. Then we'll jump into questions.
We're fighting against this thing I call the drift. The drift is actually like a big organized thing that's trying to move our country to totalitarian socialism. They're trying to use their control over respectability to shut up voices that are, pro-capitalism, pro-free markets.
Basically, information is the last battlefield for this kind of war between freedom and socialism.
We have to recognize that that's the game that they're playing. They're trying to shut us up, and we have to stand up to them. And we can't let them convince us that they control our respectability, because we control our respectability. And most of all, we can't let them bully us.
All right, again, folks, that's exclusively on Epoch TV. We do have a trail. We have a longer preview on our YouTube channel, but full interview is exclusive at Epoch TV. Be sure to check it out. All right, that said, let's jump into some questions. So again, if you have questions, leave them in the chat. We'll try to get to them. First question's up from Kenny. He said, Josh, several world leaders joined in Event 201 in October 2019 to wargame scenarios stemming from a hypothetical global pandemic crisis. Yes, this did happen. We all know what followed in 2020. Now, earlier this month, Reuters reported on common strength. Yeah. So this was a really strange event. And as Kenny notes, yeah, basically world leaders got together, including the US, including a lot of other countries. They got together under what was called Event 201. And you saw a lot of the big names behind the pandemic very active with that. A lot of the same organizations very active with that. And this is where they basically war gamed a hypothetical virus outbreak, which also had some ties to China and so on. They even gave out little COVID looking virus plushy toys, which you can see online still. This is of course leading to a lot of speculation that the pandemic may just be kind of tied to this, that maybe the release of COVID, whether it was intentional or unintentional, wherever it came from, because they still haven't really told us. All evidence points to Wuhan in China. If you haven't watched the documentary I did over a year ago, check it out because we talk about it. And all new evidence is pointing that way as well. Proudly, we have not yet had to print a correction on that. That it looks like someone or some groups, if not planned this, had incredible foresight to plan an event basically preparing for the exact situation that did emerge. And it's quite bizarre on that note. We can't say exactly what happened, but we can look at things like the NIH and other organizations and their internal discussions trying to suppress investigations into the type of research they were doing alongside the Chinese Communist Party's Wuhan Institute of Virology and other virus research labs in China. Research on what they call gain of function research, chimeric hybrid type viruses they were creating. Again, chimeric, the actual name they use for it. And other things that do suggest, at least, that at the very least, they were working on something weird that very, very much reflects the exact virus outbreak we're currently seeing. It's a very strange story, but it did happen. This is true, and it's pretty bizarre. Scott Teeds, you're saying, Josh, have you done your report from when you were at the border? I have not yet. I'm working on some other stuff first, and hopefully I'll get something on that to you soon. I have a lot going on right now, and so I have a few other things that are going to be hopefully coming up before that, but that's still in the works, and so I'll be showing you all that. Again, I did a week-long investigative project at the border. Hopefully, again, I'll be showing you the investigation from that soon. Linda Manning is asking, Josh, he said, do you think the Chinese can be trusted not to hold these athletes hostage if they go to the Olympics? Well, that is actually one of the big concerns right now, is the athletes themselves may not be safe if they go to China. There have been cases of this before. We can look, for example, at Meng Wanzhou, the CFO of Huawei, again, Chinese telecommunications company, who was arrested in Canada, and the CCP retaliated to her arrest by arresting 2 Canadian citizens who then tried charging with espionage. They were facing the death sentence. And then the CCP started making threats, basically like hostage negotiations, saying that if Canada releases Meng Wanzhou, that it would release these 2 individuals, these 2 Canadian citizens. Again, not normal behavior for any first world country. This is like what terrorist organizations do, hostage negotiations. And again, a lot of people were believing that the charges the CCP had against these 2 Canadian citizens were basically trumped up fake charges. Again, a hostage situation. At the same time, we've seen the CCP retaliate against a lot of Western businesses, even Western nations, Lithuania being one of the big ones right now, making threats against Australia. Again, they have this, what they call wolf warrior diplomacy policy. They've been arresting even Taiwanese citizens in many parts of the world and extraditing them to mainland China. Taiwan is a self-governing island. They have a totally separate government, totally separate system. And the CCP is exercising legal control over them. Keep in mind, that's also what they did to Hong Kong just prior to their forceful takeover and ending of Hong Kong's democracy. Again, the former agreement they had of 1 country, 2 systems. That was what they were doing. And now, the point with all this being that we've seen the CCP getting more aggressive with arresting people who it should have no jurisdiction over. And we've seen the CCP making threats even against American athletes, like with the NBA, even with American businesses, even making sanctions against top officials in the United States and elsewhere, even top-level officials, and have now been sanctioned by the CCP, not because they did anything illegal, but because they put sanctions or tariffs on the CCP in retaliation for its human rights abuses, such as the genocide of Muslim Uyghurs, for example, or calling out the CCP for its other human rights abuses. Meaning, if the CCP would sanction a top-level U.S. official for basically standing up against what is actually genocide taking place in China, what's going to happen if an athlete goes to China and they also raise the issue of, say, human rights abuses, the issue of genocide, the issue of slavery in China? Will the CCP retaliate against them in extreme ways, as it will even do against top-level U.S. officials? I'd say the chances of that are actually very high. It's who knows what they will do in the end, but the aggression and track record of the CCP so far suggests that that would not be far-fetched for them to target athletes. Next question's from Thand004. He said, if Ukraine falls, does it have greater impact on geopolitics than Crimea? It does. This goes back to Duginism, which is, I won't get too deep into this, but there's a theory over who controls kind of the Eurasia landmass. And basically whoever controls that area controls the world, so to speak. Duginism is an actual, like, if you want to talk about actual, like, Nazi type stuff, it's actual, like, neo-Nazi type stuff. And Dugin is one of the main advisors strategically for a lot of the Russian policy. And so this does align with this whole Duginism approach of controlling the Eurasian landmass. If Russia can exercise this level of control over not just Ukraine, but a few other areas, they basically control that. Them combined with China run the system, essentially. And they believe that if they can control that, they basically control the world under this geopolitical theory, again, Duginism. And again, this is one of the main political beliefs that informs Russian strategic leadership. And so this isn't like some random thing, of course. That being said, we'll see if it actually works. We do see Russia able to have large influence over a lot of Western Europe, a lot of control through the control of energy, which they do seem to be exercising to some extent. They do have a lot of negotiating power. The United States, as has always been the case, is kind of the thorn in the side of a lot of these types of political agendas that countries such as China or Russia may have. And so also any serious program like that would require the suppression of the United States. But a lot of the defensive policies they have are essentially what the Soviets would call like the salami strategy, or what China would call the cabbage strategy. And I know these sound goofy, but hear me out. That basically the taking of things in rings. Let me explain it from a different way. Mao Zedong, former head of the Chinese Communist Party, had a saying, which was, surround the city with the countrysides. And this was a military strategy. It was one of the ways that the CCP used to conquer China. Again, when the Kuomintang controlled China, which later became the government over for the island of Formosa or Taiwan. The idea of surround the city with the countrysides is, rather than take over the cities, rather than conquer the cities, he focused on controlling the countrysides, the breadbasket for the cities. And they believe that if you can control the food, if you can control the supplies, if you control the logistics, you control the cities, even if you don't directly conquer them. We can see how the CCP has been using this same strategy elsewhere. And other countries are as well. When you talk about one of the main communist agendas, what is it? Seize the means of production. Who controls the means of production? Who controls the world's factories? Who controls the world's farms? Who controls the world's energy? If you start looking at the means of production globally, you can see concerted efforts to take these over. This is where you get into Chinese economic theft, cyber attacks, and so on. This is where you get into them buying up farmland all throughout Latin America, using things, for example, like the One Belt, One Road initiative to get countries into debt traps and seize their minerals, seize their food supplies, and so on. The Chinese Communist Party, if it does not currently control it, is trying to control it. And Russia has been following on the backs of a lot of that as well through their own means, energy control being one of the major ones. Meanwhile, you can see them pushing a lot of these climate policies that affect the rest of the world, but not them, because they are some of the major voices at the United Nations. The idea is that if they can slowly cut off the United States, essentially, right, by seizing the means of production globally, and by getting certain countries to side with them, a lot of the Asia Pacific region, most of Africa, most of Latin America, deeply under the influence of actually Iran and China, or one of the two. And a lot of, again, the Eurasian region, also heavy Russian influence, especially former Soviet bloc countries. And Russia are now trying to block the US and NATO from expanding into the former Soviet bloc. They control a lot of that still, if not directly, then indirectly. That yes, they are doing this. They are controlling things. And if they can cut off these different countries, they become paper tigers. They lose this influence. And so essentially that's the basic strategy. And from that perspective, Ukraine does have broader significance strategically because of this. Question from Seymour Butts. You said, Josh, I often hear that a politician doesn't live in the district they represent. I think they're legally required to, but they often don't. Yeah, and as you said, I thought there were laws that made this impossible. Can you elaborate on this? Well, this is where we get into the unfortunate reality that, frankly, there are written laws that are often broken. And this is one of the issues you have with politicized law, essentially, is that who's going to go after it? If the systems of law, if the courts, for example, or the district attorneys don't want to prosecute things, they're not going to prosecute things. Crime can become legal, essentially, if the people who control the books on what is legal or illegal choose to change the laws in their own personal favor. This is one of the unfortunate realities we're facing in the U.S., I'd say, politicized law. And it's also tying into a lot of the defund the police movements where, they're getting rid of a lot of laws that would protect the average citizen while enhancing laws that advance the personal interests of people within the establishment itself. This is just one of the unfortunate realities of the way things have been going for a while now with, you could call it corruption, frankly, but it's basically the rewriting of laws to legalize things that would normally be legal for personal benefit. Another question here from Jay Pensula, and just an example of that also. Just an example of that also. You can see them doing this with like the For the People Act, trying to rewrite election laws. Basically, again, trying to make things that are normally illegal legal. Because, well, frankly, they might believe that the illegal acts would benefit them in some way. And they believe that they need those illegal acts in order to do what they hope to do. The problem is it's illegal. So what do you do if you want to do something illegal and you control the systems of law? You legalize the thing that is illegal. And that's what they're trying to do. Whether it's through emergency powers or otherwise, right? All right, next question from Jay Pensile. He said, whatever happened to the Chinese defector? Oh, yeah. So there have been a few Chinese defectors. I believe the one you're talking about was the top-level security defector. The other big one is Dr. Li Mengyan, who we had on the show recently. She was the defector from Hong Kong, worked in one of the virus laboratories. But I believe you're talking about the top-level security director, allegedly, that defected to the West. There were reports of this. The CCP okay, just be clear, this was never fully confirmed, but reactions within the CCP itself suggested it was true. And also, basically, let me explain what happened. So, a while back, was it a year ago or half a year ago now? My sense of time has been kind of off since this whole COVID outbreak. Not that long ago, there was stories that a top-level military official within China defected to the United States. This individual allegedly went directly to the U.S. military intelligence. We never heard anything publicly about this. We never heard it confirmed. We never really heard it denied. The CCP denied it, but at the same time as the CCP denying it, they sent out internal alerts, which were actually made public, basically sending out warnings on party loyalty and stuff, which led a lot of people to believe that actually it's probably true. That someone very high up who had knowledge about Chinese Communist Party military agenda, what they were planning to do, defected to the United States and went directly to the US military intelligence. Now, if this was true, if it wasn't true, the CCP probably wouldn't have reacted the way it was. So we can assume that evidence suggests that it was true. But entertaining the idea of whether it's true or not, entertaining the idea that it is true, this could actually be pretty serious, because the individual went not to media. In other words, the individual didn't come as a whistleblower, right? A lot of times when you have people defect from China and they want to get information out, they'll go to the media. I mean, they'll often come to Epoch Times because we're kind of like, the free media of China. CCP hates us, and so we get a lot of exclusives. They might go to Steve Bannon's show, again, his COVID pandemic show or War Room pandemic show. They might go to other channels like this that are known to have, being willing to broadcast information that exposes the CCP pretty deeply. A lot of defectors who come out do that. This defector did not do that. Rather than going to the media, this defector went to the top levels of U.S. military intelligence. And this was a military defector suggesting they may have had information that they believed was sensitive enough to not want to go to the normal media, including media that may have a stronger stance against the CCP, meaning they would have a platform to fully express what they're trying to say. To the degree, and that would suggest that what they were saying, they believe would need to be kept quiet and may have enough significance that, again, the military itself would help them keep it quiet. Based on that, we can assume, and a lot of the speculation has been, that the CCP may have been planning something militarily. This defector left before it could happen and warned U.S. military intelligence of this. And we have seen the United States take actually even under Biden, a much stronger defensive stance against the CCP. I just mentioned, of course, the article from Kyodo News in Japan that the U.S. and Japan are allegedly even preparing a military response if China were to try to forcefully take Taiwan. And we've seen international alliances forming. Even Justin Trudeau of Canada now, and they used to be really close. They used to be really close to the CCP. Even he's now talking about forming, ironically, a united front, which is a communist thing. He's talking about forming a united front against the CCP. And so something shifted. It's unclear what the cause of that shift was. Maybe it was COVID. Maybe it was his pressure. A lot of countries were pretty favorable towards the CCP in early COVID days. Remember when Nancy Pelosi and all them were going to Chinatown and calling Trump racist for putting travel bans in China? Remember that? A lot of countries were pretty favorable towards the CCP in the early days, but that changed. Something changed. Something shifted. We don't know fully what that shift was. We assume it might just be the Wolf Warrior diplomacy, stronger stance of the CCP. Totally likely as well. But there's this wild card of this defector. We don't have much information on it. That's basically what we know currently. And on that note, too, if that individual has not been able to come out publicly, it suggests that the information is still sensitive enough where they would not want to come publicly. Hopefully, if they ever do go publicly, maybe I can get them on Crossroads. Another question here, then we'll jump into some more stories. This is from Wesley Waters. He said, question, Josh, did you hear about the ruling between Project Veritas and New York Times regarding attorney-client information? Yeah. If it's the story I think you're referring to, so Project Veritas, undercover journalist organization, they do a lot of undercover videos of, media corruption and political corruption and so on. You need to check them out. They're great. Basically, they have a lawsuit right now with the New York Times. They're facing a few different things. The New York Times was able to get information from them. They published it. The judge ordered the New York Times had to unpublish that story because it had to do with information that the judge decided should not be able to be made public because, again, of these privileges. I believe that's what you're referring to. All right, folks, that's it. Let's jump into some more stories because there's a couple things I want to talk about. There's an interesting development right now in Virginia. We talked a lot about China, but let me talk about something in the U.S. Interesting development in Virginia, which if you're a parent or you've been hearing about the possible actions against parents at these school board meetings, even the Biden administration targeting parents using counterterrorism measures, parents are taking a new approach. In Virginia, they are now suing the school board, and they're doing it on a very interesting ground because they're suing them, claiming that critical race theory, this alleged anti-racism education, that critical race theory is itself racist and is very likely also a violation of the Civil Rights Act. Something we've been talking about for a while. The lawsuits are now starting. Let me explain. Now, parents in Virginia right now are suing the Albemarle County School Board, saying that the alleged anti-racist curriculum they're using there on kids with elements of critical race theory is itself racist. The Alliance Defending Freedom, the ADF, which is a legal nonprofit, said in a statement that it filed the lawsuit against the school board for, quote, enacting discriminatory policies and indoctrinating students in racial ideology, which the ADF says is a violation of students' civil rights, since it treats them differently depending on their race. Remember, folks, the Civil Rights Act, even though the dictionary definition, the actual Webster dictionary definition of racism has been rewritten. If you don't believe me, look up the current definition and go to an Internet Archive or find an older publishing like 2005 and look at what the definition used to be. They changed the definition. That does not apply to the Civil Rights Act because the Civil Rights Act actually does forbid this type of racial discrimination. Even if they tried rewriting the term racism, the law still stands. Now, the school board did not reply to the Epoch Times for a request for comment, but ADF senior counsel Kate Anderson said in a statement that, quote, our clients believe that every person is made in the image of God, deserves respect, and therefore should not be punished or rewarded for something over which they have no control, like their race. Public schools, they say, have no right to demean students because of their race, ethnicity, or religion. And notably as well, again, if they are discriminating against students based on race, ethnicity, and religion, which critical race theory does do, then that could, and by definition, is a violation of the Civil Rights Act, violation of the Equal Protections Act. The complaint says that the critical race theory ideas claim to be against racism, but, quote, far from exploring ideas or philosophies surrounding justice and reconciliation, referring to critical race theory, that ideology fosters racial division, racial stereotyping, and racial hostility. So does the policy, meaning this education policy. Now, they give one example. I won't go over the whole thing. They give one example of this in practice at this school in Virginia, where the school instructed eighth graders to allegedly understand racism as the, quote, marginalization and or oppression of people of color based on a socially constructed racial hierarchy that privileges white people. Again, suggesting that by singling out white people against every other race, that the school is itself, again, discriminating based on race in this case and ethnicity. Now, in another example, the school encouraged a lot of these things as well. I won't go into all the examples, but you're going to have in Virginia right now a legal case looking at whether critical race theory is in fact racist and whether critical race theory education is actually a violation of the Civil Rights Act. This is going to be a Virginia lawsuit. If it goes to the Supreme Court, we'll see how that goes. But regardless of that, we could see similar lawsuits across the country because by definition, folks, critical race theory does discriminate against students, does divide them, does segregate them, ironically, based on race, ethnicity, and on oftentimes religion as well. And again, if it does that, it's illegal, frankly. It's a violation of the civil rights of kids in these schools. So get ready for it. The interesting part with this is that parents tried going to these school board meetings, making their voices heard. They got attacked for doing so. And so they're bypassing that and they're going to the courts. Take a note from this if you believe you or yourself have been discriminated against based on these policies as well. Because again, this is the forced training being given to people. I know a lot of businesses, including any big corporation, including schools, and including universities, including if you're in the police force or government, you might have had these trainings. That these trainings themselves or these policies themselves may be a violation of your civil rights. Interesting thing to watch, interesting thing to consider. That said, folks, it's getting late, so let's call it a night here. I'll be doing, again, these lives every Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday. Again, it's 10:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Folks, we're also migrating this channel to the new channel, which is Crossroads Highlights. And so, again, we're broadcasting tonight simultaneously, Epoch TV, Crossroads Normal channel, and Crossroads Highlights. If you're on Crossroads, start moving over to Crossroads Highlights, because pretty soon we're just going to be broadcasting on Crossroads Highlights. You can find a link in the description. You can find a link right here on the bottom of the page. See right here. That's ept.ms/Crossroads Highlights. Be sure to subscribe. Be sure to hit the notification bell. And again, that'll be the new home of Crossroads. We'll still do maybe trailers here and stuff like that, but that'll be the new home of Crossroads. All right, folks, that said, again, we also have Epoch TV. It's our uncensored video platform if things ever go south here on YouTube. And so also be sure to check it out. If you want to support Crossroads, a great way to do that. Tell a friend or family member about Epoch TV. And folks, that said, we have a lot of exclusive programs there. We actually launched our first drama. It's a police drama called A Good Cop. We also have a lot of other shows that we're trying to expand at, getting a lot of stuff. One of the great ones I've mentioned a few times now is Shen Creations. Now, Shen is a New York-based performing arts company, music, dance. It's beautiful. The CCP really doesn't like them because Shen is restoring the dance culture and the internal culture of traditional Chinese dance and music that the CCP has been trying to destroy since it took power. They try to call the shows to get the shows canceled and everything. Shen can continue performing regardless of that. It's incredible what they're doing. Be sure to check it out. Folks, I'll show you a quick trailer at the end of this video of some of the other performances they do. They do, again, the show called Shen Creations. If you want some nice orchestra music or to watch some nice dance, be sure to check it out. I'll show you a trailer at the end of this video on that as well. That said, folks, as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.